The world held its breath as the boy's shot curved through the air, a perfect arc against the backdrop of 1,000 hopeful faces. Time itself seemed to slow down, every eye fixed on that single spinning ball. It was more than just a kick. It was a prayer, a dare, a lifetime of practice packed into one fleeting second. What would happen next? Would it be another near miss, another story of what could have been? And then, it happened. A sound louder than anything he'd ever imagined. The clean swish of the net, followed by an explosion of noise. The roar of a stadium finally calling his name. It wasn't just a goal. It was a detonation of joy, a tidal wave of sound that washed over him, carrying away years of quiet struggle. In that symphony of celebration, he was reborn. In that moment, everything changed. Suddenly, the coaches who had overlooked him were watching his every move, their notebooks open, their expressions filled with a newfound respect. Opportunities that were once locked doors swung wide open. And the people who once doubted him, who whispered that he wasn't good enough, suddenly wanted to stand beside him, to share in the glow of his victory. The world loves a winner, and for the first time he truly was one. The flashing cameras felt like tiny suns, each one promising a brighter future. But success didn't make the journey easier. In fact, it made it heavier. The weight of expectation settled on his shoulders, a constant companion. The pressure followed him from the field, to the locker room, into his dreams at night. Every pass had to be perfect, every shot a potential game winner. The cheers that once lifted him up now echoed with a demand. Do it again. Be better. Don't fail. He was no longer just a boy playing a game. He was a symbol of hope, and that was a heavy burden to carry. So he trained harder than ever before. He was the first to arrive at the training ground and the last to leave, long after the floodlights had been switched off. He ran drills under the blistering sun and in the pouring rain, pushing his body past its limits. Because he knew one simple, unshakable truth: a single great moment doesn't make a legend. A single shot can open a door, but it's the relentless dedication, the sweat, and the sacrifice that build a legacy. What comes after the miracle is what truly defines you. And as he stepped onto the pitch of an even bigger stadium, under brighter, more unforgiving lights, with formidable opponents staring him down, the boy realized something profound. The shot that changed everything. It wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning of a much bigger, more challenging, and more glorious one. He took a deep breath, the roar of a new crowd in his ears, ready for the next chapter. Part 3 begins with the moment he meets his greatest rival. Stay tuned.